Well, hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another Thomas Wooden Railway discussion. Today's topic is a very interesting one, as you can see by the title of this video. We are going to talk about Scruffy, the troublesome truck, and his 4 different forms of merchandise in the Thomas Wooden Railway line. So just a very quick backstory on Scruffy. If you're a Thomas Wooden Railway fan, or even just a Thomas fan in general, you probably know who Scruffy is because he is arguably the most famous troublesome truck, which is ironic because he only appeared in one Railway series story and then he appeared in the same TV series story, but he only appeared in one story in one episode, yet he's received a lot of merchandise and he's the most famous truck. So kind of an interesting conundrum, if you ask me. I love troublesome trucks in Wooden Railway merchandise, so I'm not complaining, but he's kind of received a lot of merchandise for some reason. So I've previously done a review on the first 2 versions of Scruffy, and I'm going to add in the previous, or I guess the most recent 2 versions of merchandise from the Thomas Wooden Railway line. But Scruffy, in both the books and in the television series, he was a troublesome truck that used to give Oliver a really hard time, and presumably he used to give the other engines a hard time as well. And finally, one day, Oliver had it, and he literally pulled Scruffy apart. The difference, though, in the Railway series is that Scruffy looked very different compared to what he looks like in the TV series. In the Railway series, he was painted all black, and even though it says he's a ballast truck, it kind of looks like he's transporting coal if you look at the pictures. Whereas in the Railway series, he's painted like a much lighter gray, and his face is like its own separate piece, if that makes sense. Whereas in the Railway series, a lot of the faces on like the trucks and the diesels are like ingrained to the body. So like Scruffy's face was black in the Railway series, but here it's like, you could almost, you can see that Scruffy has like his own face piece, if that makes sense, and that carries over obviously from the Railway series. So the fates of the 2 Scruffys are a little bit different. The Scruffy from the Railway series was actually scrapped after he was pulled apart because he was rotting and he wasn't well maintained. Whereas the Scruffy in the TV series, there's a tiny little epilogue at the end of the episode Toad Stands By, where we get to see that Scruffy has been rebuilt, and basically he's a much better truck because he doesn't want to get pulled apart again. And I really think that was done because it's kind of, you end on a sour note in a kid's show. It's like, oh yeah, Scruffy was pulled apart and he was never seen or heard from again. So anyway, that's the only time that Scruffy has officially appeared in the TV series. His face in the model department was actually put on a truck in the episode Put Upon Percy, where the trucks go screaming through the mine, and then they, crash, and basically like the whole mine explodes. And so it looks like it's Scruffy, but it's not Scruffy. They just reused his face. So anyway, enough with Scruffy from the TV series. Let's take an actual look at this wooden version of Scruffy. This is one of the first Thomas Wooden Railway items that I ever got. The first set, or the first piece of Thomas merchandise that I ever received, was the A Day at the Work set, which included Thomas and Coldy, and I actually did a review on it, but it also came with Scruffy. So this is actually one of the oldest pieces of, Thomas merchandise that I have in my collection from when I was a kid. It's dated 1998. There's no name on the bottom. It's in, decent shape. There's a lot of edge wear, but I actually don't mind that because Scruffy, one of the reasons Scruffy gets pulled apart is that he's in really bad shape and he hasn't been maintained because he's a private wagon, which means that he's actually owned by a company or a person, and so Sir Topham Hatt doesn't have to necessarily take care of him. So there's edge wear all over this model, but I actually think it adds to the character because, he's an old beat-up truck, so I really don't mind it at all. And I really like this version of Scruffy. There's a reason why I've never transitioned to the previous, or to the next versions that we're going to see here in just a moment. I've always liked this version. I think the face is excellent, although mine's a little crooked if you can't tell. But he has that one tooth sticking out there, so just remember that as we take a look at these other versions of Scruffy. He just has sort of a devious face, like he's a troublemaker, and I really like that. On the side here, it just says Scruffy and Company. I guess Scruffy could be named after his owners or his company, or as I called him as a kid, S.C.Ruffey, because in the English language, you're not supposed to combine those. So I called him S.C.Ruffey as a kid. I'm sure other people did that as well. But what's important to note is that I guess his company is for ballast, as we can see here, this white rock is ballast. And he's supposed to either remain, or his company's office is in Tidmouth on Sodor. But anyway, the main thing I wanted to point out there is the ballast part, because we're going to see that the cargo that he carries later on changes. So that's the first version of Scruffy. It was sold for a number of years and then retired. But interestingly, kind of with Fred Pelhay as well, he was sold on his own and therefore kind of gathered a cult following, and he's arguably the best or well-known Troublesome truck out there. So then a couple years after he was retired, we got this version of Scruffy, which was originally a limited edition 2006 re-release, whereas this Scruffy was retired in the early 2000s. And then we got sort of this, I don't know, comeback model where it's like, he's only available for a limited time, and it was just unique that Oliver got a re-release that year, and so did Toad, who are all main characters in that Toad Stands By episode. So a lot of things have changed. The first one is that Scruffy's face is a little bit different. He still has that one tooth poking out, but whereas this is like a devious, I'm looking for trouble face, this is a more of like, it looks confused to me, like, hey, what are you doing? That sort of face. But if you go back and look at the actual Toad Stands By episode, it's like Scruffy has this face throughout the episode, and then when he's put back together at the very end, he has this face on. So that's just my kind of take on what the two faces are supposed to represent. In my opinion, this version of Scruffy looks much more professional and well built than that version. So ideally you'd think this would be like a pre-crash Scruffy, and this would be like a post-crash where he's been put back together, I guess. But at the same time, I think that's really not its intent. That's just my interpretation of what these models are supposed to represent. So the wording on Scruffy remains the same. It's a little bit bolder, more colorful. Again, he's still supposed to carry ballast. The big change here, I think there are three big changes. One, the face is a little bit bigger. There's a different expression. Two, we now have like orange rusty wheels, which I think in my first review of this many years ago, I think I pointed that out, saying that, it kind of looks like, his wheels are rusting, which I don't know if that was intentional or not, but nevertheless, he looks a lot brighter now. And three, we have a removable piece of cargo, whereas this Scruffy's ballast is sort of ingrained in his model. It can't come out. This piece of ballast can actually be removed, and it's magnetic, so if you have like Cranky the Crane come along and pick it up, it's sort of like a fun little thing you can do. I don't mind that aspect. It's really weird. I like the texture of this ballast, but I guess, if you're really into removable cargo, then you're obviously going to like this version of Scruffy. So this version was only supposed to be sold for, a year and a half at most, but then after the re-release, you could still find him in stores. He wasn't sold with that special, limited time only packaging anymore. So he was actually around for a decent amount of time. I believe I got this Scruffy in the 5. No, I didn't, because that's Fred Pelhay. I guess I went out and bought this version of Scruffy around like 2007 or so, because I thought it was pretty cool, and it still is cool. So I don't think that version of Scruffy is necessarily bad, but I still prefer the old version. And then we go into this dark and dormant period where we don't have any versions of Scruffy out there. And then all of a sudden, just a few years ago, in 2017, we get a re-release version of Scruffy. And this is really bizarre. It came out of nowhere. I talked about this in an unboxing video I did back in 2017 when I actually unboxed this. Scruffy is now being sold as part of the Demolition team. And there's a lot of things that have changed here. For one, he no longer has a wood body. It's all plastic. Two, he still has removable cargo, but it's now like a crate of dynamite, which I will talk about in just a little bit. His face still has that same, Scruffy taste, Scruffy look to it, but it's different. He still has that one tooth hanging out though, which is key. It's very similar to this face. It's much angrier though. Look at that. Whereas this Scruffy just looks like he's out to cause trouble. This Scruffy looks like he's extremely mad at somebody. We still have the writing on the side. It's just very interesting though, because now the body is plastic. It's actually a tiny bit shorter than the 2006 version. The writing's actually a lot smaller. We got rid of the wood or the orange paneling. I guess it looks like, you know, like brown wood supports on his model. Those are now gone. Or actually the color is still slightly there. I shouldn't say that. Although I have a really hard time detecting color. I can't really tell if these are black or brown. I really don't know. Anyway, I'll just leave it at the fact that the color is not as pronounced as it used to be. And then we have this deal with the removable cargo, which obviously was inspired by this version of Scruffy, but the Dynamite I'm not too keen on. And the reason I'm not, well, I should say it's cool. Not, you know, we get Scruffy back almost unannounced, out of the blue. He's sold in a 2-pack now with another Blue Mountain Quarry Troublesome truck, so he's actually part of like a rolling stock pack. You press this, there's like a little lever on the side here. You can kind of see how there's an indent, and it pops the Dynamite crate out. Actually pops it pretty high. I think I did this in the unboxing, but you can like aim it and like throw it at people. So yeah, it can be a lot of fun. But in terms of what Scruffy is supposed to represent, remember, he's supposed to be a ballast car, or at least the company that he is owned by is a ballast contracting company. So to all of a sudden put Dynamite in here isn't necessarily wrong. It's just a little unique, because Troublesome trucks are supposed to carry, a wide variety of loads. I mean, to essentially restrict a Troublesome truck to just one type of, you know, thing it's supposed to carry is, I don't know, a little bit over the top and high maintenance, if you ask me. Like, you know, we're worrying about details that don't need to be worried about. So I don't know exactly how I feel about that. I would love to see a version of Scruffy where the ballast comes back, either in removable form or in non-removable form. But it was weird. Just all of a sudden, this was announced with like very little fanfare, and we just got a third version of Scruffy just out of the blue. And yeah, there are a ton of changes, but nonetheless, Scruffy is still alive and kicking. And I thought, okay, you know, we got one version of Scruffy back there who was sold for a long time. Then we got the re-release. And I'm thinking, okay, unless Scruffy comes back to the TV series, there is no way we are getting a third version of Scruffy. And lo and behold, we did get a third version of Scruffy. And I'm thinking the same thing now. It's 2017. And I'm thinking, okay, this has just come out. There is no way we get a fourth version of Scruffy unless he comes back to the TV series. And here we are with our fourth version, and Scruffy still hasn't appeared. This is the Thomas & Friends wood version that is sold in a 2-pack with a version of Ryan that looks very similar. Out of all the models, it's the one that's the least changed, you know, between, you know, its predecessor. The Dynamite shooty thing is still relevant, or it's still there. Interesting, you know, the stacks of Dynamite in design have changed, although the mold that they used for the Dynamite remains the same. I actually prefer this version, the wood version. And then there's a little contraption on the inside where it clicks in to the truck. It's like spring loaded. So Scruffy is still a Dynamite truck. His face is a tiny bit different. Most notably around the mouth area, like his mouth has been blackened out, so you can actually see his lone tooth better. But the faces are extremely similar, like they're almost identical. It's just now this Scruffy's eyebrows are in like a triangular fashion, if you can see that, whereas these are more straight. So again, I'm not really sure what the purpose of this Scruffy model is. He has not appeared in the TV series. You know, I guess his main purpose is to, all of a sudden he's now a Dynamite truck. And on the side here, you know, that's the same function as before with, you know, that 2017 version. In my opinion, you can actually see the orange or the brown detailing better here, whereas I was having trouble deciphering whether that was actually brown or just black, like the panels there. There's a difference there. The writing is really, really small. like smaller than before. Hopefully you guys can see that. So the writing has continued to get smaller as the years have gone on. I don't know what these lines are supposed to represent. Like I said, he was sold in a 2-pack with Ryan, and that version of Ryan is actually called Dynamite Ryan. But this version of Scruffy is just called Scruffy. So apparently somewhere along the line we'll get a wood version of Ryan that doesn't have these like streaks or flares. It looks like wheat, like through like a cornfield or like a grass field that have like stuck to the side. I think it's supposed to represent sparks because, you know, everything in the Thomas Wood universe is overblown and way out of proportion. So it's like they're running down the rails. You know, if you can imagine, you know, Ryan's up here, they're running down the rails and they're going so fast that there's sparks flying everywhere. And then, you know, Scruffy has like this highly explosive load and any spark set the whole thing off. That's just my guess as to what this is supposed to represent. But needless to say, I don't agree with this whole premise of Scruffy being a dynamite truck, and I just don't understand it. Like I said, on one hand, it's cool that Scruffy is still alive and kicking, but at the same time, we are now getting to the point where, kind of like with the whole Thomas series as a whole, the, you know, what was originally created has been morphed and distorted so much that you can hardly recognize where it came from. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, but, you know, compared to what Thomas used to be, the series is heading in a very interesting direction where it's going to be very hard to tell, you know, that the Railway series and the early episodes of the TV series were actually a form of inspiration for stuff like Big World, Big Adventures and all that. So I'm just pointing out, it still says ballast there, so in my opinion, he should still be a ballast truck, but I don't want to get too into this and, you know, say, oh, you know, only certain troublesome trucks can carry certain things. And I don't want to get into that, but I'm just kind of pointing out, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a factual error, but just with the details we're giving, I'm just kind of pointing out, you know, oh, it's kind of a fun fact here. So somehow this troublesome truck that has only appeared in one Railway series episode and one TV series episode has 4 Wooden Railway models all of a sudden. I get these two, you know, because, I mean, this version of Scruffy's 20 years old. So, you know, this was sold for a long time. This was actually sold for a long time. This was only actually sold for a year. This is technically 2017 and this is 2018. So to get 2 new models, you know, back to back, or I guess a new model, just one, you know, very, very quickly all of a sudden is a bit strange. It's just, I don't know, it's bizarre. I'm not really sure what to say. I hope you guys can kind of, I don't know, put into words what you're thinking about this whole Scruffy revolution that's going on. And what's incredibly surprising is that although Scruffy has remained quote-unquote relevant in the Thomas Wooden Railway line all these years, you know, he's had a model pretty consistently, in adventures form or, you know, take along. I don't think he ever got a take along or take and play version. There was an Erdl version, but that was a long time ago. Trackmaster, like long time ago, Trackmaster. So it's weird that they choose to keep Scruffy around when, out of all things, he hasn't been introduced into the TV series. I would feel much better about these 2 versions of Scruffy if there was a TV series, you know, counterpart that represented what we see here in this merchandise form. Right now, it just seems like an open book, sort of like a run-on sentence, like, okay, what's the point of this? But if Scruffy actually returned to the series and served a purpose and got like his own, I don't know, reintroductory episode, and I don't know, was, you know, featured as sort of a reoccurring character where it's not just these generic troublesome trucks in the background, it's like, oh, there's Scruffy, oh, there's Hector, oh, there's Fred Pelhay, that sort of thing, then I would feel much better about this version of Scruffy. But right now I'm just sitting here scratching my head, shaking my head as well, trying to figure out what is the purpose of this model, besides just, you know, making him a generic troublesome truck. I mean, the other truck that was included with this Scruffy back here was just a generic Blue Mountain Quarry truck. So what makes Scruffy so special to bring him back? And like I said, I don't want to be on the attack and say he shouldn't have been brought back because I think it's great that these old characters, I mean, Scruffy is, you know, the Reverend W. Awdry's creation. It's cool that he's still living. He's still out there for a new generation of kids to enjoy. But now we're getting to the point with, you know, the Dynamite stuff and everything that it's kind of, is this really even the same Scruffy that the Reverend Awdry even intended to let people all around the world know about? So anyway, that's my version, or my review. I want to see if these are actually interchangeable. I believe they are. Oh, they are. Interesting. All right, I'm going to put everything back to the way it was. That's my review or re-review of these versions of Scruffy over the years. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Personally, I think there's this big conspiracy theory out there that Scruffy is bound to return eventually. He has to with all this merchandise, but it's like, you know, I'm trying to figure out what and why and when that will happen. So anyway, as with all of my Thomas Wooden Railway discussions, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions and conspiracy theories. Until the next video that I upload, this is Thomas Wooden Railway saying thanks for watching, and I look forward to your comments in the description below.